John had always believed that life was something ordinary, almost invisible. He lived in a small apartment on the edge of a crowded city, where tall buildings blocked the sunlight and the streets were noisy with cars and people rushing past. His days were predictable. Wake up early, go to work, come home tired, eat a simple meal, and fall asleep to the sound of distant traffic. He had friends, but they were busy with their own lives, and family was far away. In his own mind, John felt like a shadow that no one really noticed. He dreamed sometimes of adventure, of something extraordinary, but he never expected it to reach him. Even on the dullest days, John tried to find small comforts. He liked the quiet moments before sunrise when the city felt almost empty, and he could hear birds singing despite the hum of electricity. He enjoyed reading books about faraway lands, imagining places he might never see. But reality was always waiting at the door. Bills, responsibilities, work stress, they were reminders that the world he lived in had no space for magic, no room for the impossible. One chilly evening, John left work later than usual. The city was dimly lit by streetlights reflecting off wet asphalt from an earlier rain. He wrapped his coat tighter around himself, shivering, and took his usual path home through a narrow alleyway he sometimes used to save time. It was quiet, too quiet, he thought. Most people avoided this route at night, and even street vendors had packed up for the day. As he walked, the sound of his shoes echoed against the walls, and the usual hum of the city seemed to fade. John had a strange feeling, the kind that crawls along the back of your neck, warning you of something unusual. He paused and looked around. The alley seemed empty, but he could have sworn he saw a shadow move just out of the corner of his eye. He shook his head and laughed softly. "I'm just tired," he whispered to himself. "It's probably nothing." Yet the unease remained. His pulse quickened slightly, and his steps slowed. He wished he had taken the main street instead, even if it meant being a few minutes late getting home. As he continued, the shadow appeared again. This time he didn't try to convince himself it was his imagination. A figure was standing farther down the alley, just beyond the reach of the dim light. It was large, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. John froze. His mind raced, trying to understand what he was seeing. Could it be a person? But no, the figure didn't look human. Its movements were too fluid, too deliberate, and the glow of its eyes was unlike anything John had ever seen. Fear gripped him, but he also felt an inexplicable curiosity. "Hello?" John called, his voice trembling slightly. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move closer either. It simply watched, its presence dominating the small space of the alley. John's heart pounded in his chest. He thought about turning and running, but something held him in place, a strange mix of fear and fascination. He felt as though he were standing at the edge of a moment that could change everything. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward. It moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, silent and precise. John could now see it more clearly. It was not human. Its body was covered in sleek, dark fur that seemed to absorb the dim light, and its eyes glowed like amber lanterns in the night. It had the shape of a hound, but larger and more powerful than any dog John had ever seen. Its gaze was intelligent, almost calculating, and yet there was a strange calmness to it, as if it were observing him rather than attacking. John's mind tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Could it be an animal of some kind? No animal he knew could move like that, or have eyes that shone in such a way. He felt a mixture of awe and terror. His body wanted to run, but his mind felt frozen, unable to act. The hound tilted its head slightly, studying him, and John could almost feel it assessing him, like a predator deciding whether he was prey or something more. Minutes felt like hours as they stood there, facing each other. The city around them faded into the background, leaving only John and this extraordinary creature. He could hear his own breathing, loud and uneven, and the distant sounds of traffic seemed distant, almost unreal. He felt small, exposed, and completely alone, yet he could not look away. There was a sense that this encounter was not random, that somehow the hound had chosen him specifically for a reason he could not yet understand. Then, almost imperceptibly, the hound spoke. The words were not loud, but they seemed to echo inside John's mind. You are compatible. The sound of it made him shiver. He didn't understand the meaning at first, but instinctively, he knew his life was about to change. A cold realization washed over him, whatever this meant. It was not something he could ignore, and it was not something he could run from. The word compatible felt like a verdict, a label that would define the rest of his existence. Fear took over him completely. His mind raced through every possible scenario. Was he about to be captured? Tested? Taken somewhere far away? He had no answers, and yet he felt strangely certain that whatever was coming, it was irreversible. He wanted to scream, to flee, but his body refused to obey. He could only stand there, staring into the glowing eyes of the Hound, feeling the full weight of the unknown pressing down on him for the first time in his life. John felt truly invisible in one way and completely seen in another. The Hound seemed to understand him better than anyone ever had, reading his thoughts and emotions without words. The ordinary life he had known, the life of routine, comfort, and predictability, suddenly felt fragile, insignificant, and unreal. Everything he had built, every expectation he had about the future, seemed to crumble in that one moment of silent confrontation. Finally, the Hound took a step closer, and John felt a strange warmth mixed with fear. The world around him felt suspended, as if holding its breath. He realized that this encounter was not just about fear, but about choice. The Hound had made a declaration, and now it was up to him to face it. The ordinary life he had always clung to was gone, replaced by a reality that demanded courage, understanding, and surrender to something far beyond his imagination. As he slowly exhaled, John felt a mixture of dread and awe. He understood that nothing would ever be the same again. His small, safe, and predictable world had ended the moment the Hound appeared, and he could no longer pretend that life would continue as before. The city lights flickered behind him, the distant noise of traffic a reminder of a world he was leaving behind. His life as he knew it was over, and yet, in that terrifying moment, he felt the first stirrings of something new, something powerful, and something utterly unknown. John could not take his eyes off the alien Hound. Its presence was overwhelming, yet there was a strange calm in the way it moved. Unlike anything he had ever seen, the Hound carried an air of intelligence that felt almost human. Its glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him, reading his thoughts, understanding his fears, and probing his very soul. John felt exposed in a way he had never experienced before. Every secret, every hidden fear seemed to be known to this creature. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand answers, but the words refused to form. His throat felt dry, and his hands shook slightly. It was as though the very air around the Hound held a strange power, preventing him from moving or thinking clearly. He realized that this was not just an animal or a strange being, it was something far beyond his understanding, something that existed on a level completely outside human experience. Then, without warning, the Hound moved closer. Its steps were silent, almost floating above the wet pavement of the alley. John's heart raced, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. He stepped back instinctively, but the Hound did not advance aggressively. Instead, it stopped just a few feet away, sitting down as if it were observing him, studying him like a scientist examining a specimen. Its glowing eyes never left his face. John felt a wave of both fear and fascination wash over him. Finally, the Hound spoke again. Its voice was low, calm, and resonant, but it echoed directly inside John's mind. There was no sound in the air, yet the words were unmistakable. You are compatible. The phrase hit John like a physical blow. His mind raced. What did it mean? Compatible with what? With whom? He had no answers. He felt a sudden surge of panic. For a moment, he thought he might faint. His life, which had always seemed ordinary and predictable, suddenly felt fragile and meaningless. Everything he had known was about to change, and he had no idea how. Compatible, he whispered, his voice trembling. With what? Who? Are you? The Hound tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging his question, though it did not answer in words aloud. Instead, John felt the meaning of its statement flow into his mind, like a wave of thought reaching across the distance between them. He realized with growing horror and fascination that this was a being from somewhere far beyond Earth. Its species did not see humans as ordinary beings. They saw them as potential partners, tools, or even vessels for something greater. And John, by some unfathomable measure, had been chosen. The weight of that realization pressed down on him. He had never felt so small, so insignificant, yet at the same time, he felt as if the universe had turned its gaze directly upon him. Every fear he had ever had, fear of failure, of loneliness, of being forgotten now, seemed trivial compared to what he was facing. The Hound had chosen him, and he could no longer pretend that his life was his own. John tried to reason. Perhaps this was a dream, a hallucination caused by exhaustion or stress. Maybe he was imagining the glowing eyes, the way the Hound seemed to communicate without speaking. He blinked rapidly, forcing himself to focus, to see clearly. But the Hound was real. Every movement, every calculated tilt of its head confirmed it. This was no illusion. And the phrase, "You are compatible," was a declaration. A verdict that would shape the rest of his life. The Hound began to move around him slowly, circling him like a predator, though there was no aggression in its motion. John felt trapped, yet he could not move. The alley, which had once seemed just a shortcut home, now felt like a stage for an encounter that defied all reason. He noticed how the Hound's fur shimmered slightly under the dim light, almost as if it held some hidden energy, some power that he could not comprehend. Its gaze followed him wherever he looked. He felt as though it could see his thoughts as clearly as he could see the alley walls. Then, without warning, the Hound stopped and crouched slightly. Lowering itself to the ground, its eyes softened, and John felt a strange sensation, an almost gentle presence, though it was still overwhelmingly alien. It was as if the Hound was trying to communicate that its intentions were not immediately harmful. Yet the meaning of compatible remained a mystery. John realized that whatever was about to happen, he would have no choice. The Hound species had found him, and there was no turning back. In the minutes that followed, John's mind raced with questions. Why him? What did compatible mean in this context? Was he about to be taken somewhere? Were they testing him? Every scenario seemed more terrifying than the last, and yet beneath the fear, there was an unexplainable curiosity. Part of him wanted to understand, to know the truth, even if it meant stepping into danger. He had spent his entire life feeling invisible, and now, for the first time, the universe had singled him out. That thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. The Hound's presence seemed to amplify John's awareness of the world around him. The alley no longer seemed ordinary. He noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The pattern of raindrops on the pavement, the flicker of a distant streetlight, the way shadows stretched along the walls. Every sound, every movement felt magnified, as if the Hound's presence had sharpened his senses to an extraordinary degree. It was both beautiful and frightening, like stepping into a world that was alive in ways he had never imagined. Arzora perhaps only minutes past, though John could not be sure. Time seemed suspended in the presence of the alien Hound. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, but another part of him felt rooted to the spot. He realized that this encounter was not about fear alone. It was about understanding, about connection, about the moment when the ordinary human life he had known collided with something extraordinary. Finally, the Hound spoke again, this time with more clarity. Words flowed into John's mind, not as sounds but as concepts he could understand. The Hound explained in the simplest terms that its species traveled across galaxies searching for humans who could endure a special bond. Compatibility meant that John's mind, body, and spirit had the rare qualities necessary to survive this bond, to serve as a bridge between worlds. Most humans failed the test without even realizing it. But John, he had been chosen. The thought made his stomach turn. Chosen for what? For survival? For partnership? For something beyond comprehension? The Hound's words painted visions in his mind, glimpses of distant planets, creatures of unimaginable forms, and challenges that humans were never meant to face. And through it all, he saw himself at the center, not as a hero or a conqueror, but as a participant in something larger than life itself. Fear gave way to realization. John understood that his ordinary life was over. The routine, the safety, the predictable world he had clung to it had ended the moment the Hound had declared him compatible. There was no going back. Every choice, every moment from now on would be defined by this encounter. And though terror gripped him, he also felt a strange sense of purpose. Perhaps for the first time, his life had meaning beyond the mundane. As the Hound finally stepped back, allowing him space, John felt his legs tremble. He tried to speak, to ask more questions, but the words failed. Instead, he nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth he could not deny. His ordinary life, the one he had always known, had ended. Fear, awe, and a flicker of anticipation filled his mind. He understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, he felt alive in a way that he never had before. The alley seemed smaller now, the shadows longer, the night darker, but John no longer felt alone. He knew the Hound would guide him, challenge him, and perhaps even protect him. Whatever compatibility meant, it was not a curse alone, it was an invitation, terrifying and wondrous, to a life far beyond his imagining. And though fear still lingered, a spark of determination ignited within him. He would face whatever was coming, even if it meant leaving everything he had ever known behind. John's thoughts were a whirlwind. The words "you are compatible" echoed endlessly in his mind. He could not stop thinking about them, and no matter how he tried, he could not forget the glowing eyes of the alien Hound. He had always imagined extraordinary things happening to other people, not to himself. But now, there was no doubt he had been chosen, singled out for something beyond his understanding. The alley, which had felt strange and threatening before, now seemed like a gateway to something entirely unknown. The Hound's presence was both frightening and mesmerizing. It sat silently, observing him, its gaze steady and unyielding. John felt the urge to ask questions, to demand answers, but his mind could barely focus. Even as fear clawed at his chest, a part of him wanted to understand. To know why he had been deemed compatible, the Hound's thoughts began to enter his mind again, not his words, but his images and feelings. John saw flashes of distant worlds, landscapes unlike anything on Earth, towering forests with glowing plants, oceans that shimmered in colors he could not name, skies filled with multiple moons and strange flying creatures. He saw beings of many shapes, some terrifying, some beautiful, all moving with purpose and intelligence. And in the center of it all, he saw humans few and far between interacting with these beings, surviving challenges that would have crushed ordinary minds. John realized with a sinking heart that he was meant to be one of those humans. Compatibility was not a casual thing. It was a rare gift or perhaps a burden. Most humans could not survive what the Hound species required. Most would fail, their minds collapsing under the weight of the experiences, their bodies unable to endure the bond that the Hound and its kind created. And he, somehow, was one of the few who could withstand it. The thought made him shiver. He had always felt ordinary, weak, and invisible. How could he, an ordinary man with a simple life, be capable of surviving something so extraordinary? His mind replayed memories of his failures, his quiet life, his small, unnoticed existence. Yet the Hound's presence challenged all of that. Perhaps ordinary was not enough. Perhaps survival meant more than strength, more than courage, more than what he had ever imagined himself capable of. As he stood there, frozen in thought, the Hound moved closer. Its movements were precise, deliberate, almost like a ritual. John felt the air change around him, as if invisible threads were weaving between them. He realized this was not just observation anymore. The Hound was testing him, preparing him, introducing him to the process that all compatible humans would undergo. Fear surged again, sharp and overwhelming. But it was mixed with curiosity. The Hound projected more images into John's mind, showing him the bond in action. He saw humans connected to their alien counterparts in a way that was more than physical or emotionally, was mental, spiritual, and mysterious. The humans did not speak, yet they understood the aliens perfectly. Thoughts, emotions, and knowledge flowed freely between them, creating a connection that was both intimate and powerful. John saw how some humans struggled at first, their minds resisting the connection, but eventually they learned to accept it. He also saw the consequences of rejection. Humans who were deemed compatible but resisted the bond suffered greatly. They became isolated, haunted by visions of what could have been, trapped in fear and regret. The Hound made it clear that refusal was not just a personal choice, it affected others. The bond was a responsibility, a duty, a lifeline between species. Those who ignored it not only lost themselves, endangered the harmony that the Hound species sought to maintain. John felt a cold fear grip him. He had never thought of his life in terms of responsibility beyond himself. Yet now, the images made it clear that his choices mattered. Not only for him, but for something much larger than Earth, larger than humanity. He was part of a chain, a network of lives and connections that stretched across worlds. The ordinary rules of life no longer applied. The ordinary life he had known, work, bills, small routines, was irrelevant in the face of this reality. The Hound's eyes never left him. John felt that it was waiting, expecting him to understand, to decide, to feel the weight of what it meant to be compatible. He realized that the Hound was not cruel, not malevolent. It was a guardian, a teacher, a guide. Its species had seen countless humans, but only a few had the rare combination of strength, intelligence, and openness needed for survival. And John had been selected not by chance, because he possessed qualities he had never recognized in himself. Questions raced through John's mind. Was he ready? Could he endure the bond? Could he survive the challenges ahead? The Hound, as if sensing his doubts, projected another vision. This time, John saw a moment of success, a human standing beside a Hound, facing an alien threat with courage and understanding. The human's mind was clear, focused, and strong. The Hound was calm, a silent partner, providing guidance and insight. Together, they overcame obstacles that seemed impossible. The vision filled John with both hope and dread. He understood then that compatibility was not only a test, it was an opportunity. He had a chance to become part of something greater, to transcend the ordinary life he had always known. But with that opportunity came immense responsibility. He could no longer think in terms of comfort or safety. Every thought, every choice, every action would now have consequences far beyond his understanding. The ordinary world he had clung to was gone. He had been chosen, and there was no turning back. Fear battled with determination inside him. He wanted to run, to escape, to hide in the life he had always known. Yet another part of him, the part that had always dreamed of adventure, of meaning, of being noticed, urged him forward. He realized that life had offered him a choice, terrifying and extraordinary, and he could no longer remain passive. The Hound was waiting, patient, yet unwavering. And he knew that the time to act would come soon. The alley felt different now, charged with energy he could not explain. The ordinary sounds of the city, the hum of distant traffic, the drip of water from the gutters, the faint rustle of leaves seemed distant, as if he were standing on the edge of two worlds. One was the familiar, mundane life he had always known. The other was vast, unknown, and alive with possibilities and dangers beyond comprehension. John felt both drawn and terrified, caught between what was safe and what was extraordinary. He thought of the people in his life, friends, family, colleagues. How could he explain this? How could anyone understand that he had been declared compatible by an alien being? He realized that his old life would never make sense again. Even if he tried to return to it, he would see the world differently. The ordinary would feel dull, meaningless, insufficient. He would always carry the memory of this moment, the weight of the Hound's gaze, and the knowledge that he had been chosen for something that would test every part of him. Time seemed to stretch as he stood there, contemplating the images, the possibilities, the responsibilities. The Hound remained calm, patient, unwavering. John realized that the creature was not demanding immediate action. It was giving him a moment to understand, to accept, and to prepare for the journey ahead. But he also knew that the decision was inevitable. Compatibility was not a suggestion. It was a destiny that he could not ignore. Finally, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. Fear was still there, sharp and biting, but beneath it was a strange, thrilling sense of purpose. He understood that his life as he had known it was truly over. He could no longer live as an ordinary human, invisible and unnoticed. The moment of choice had come, and he knew that the path ahead would be challenging, strange and uncertain, but also extraordinary. The Hound moved closer again, its eyes glowing with a quiet intensity. John felt a connection forming, subtle but undeniable. Thoughts, feelings, and understanding began to flow in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. He realized that the bond was beginning. It's the first step of a journey that would transform him, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And though fear still gripped him, he felt a spark of courage, a recognition that he could survive and perhaps even thrive. In this new reality, John nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth he could not deny. He was compatible. He had been chosen. His ordinary life was over. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose, a connection to something greater than himself. And as the Hound watched him, silent yet powerful, he knew that the real journey was only beginning, a journey that would challenge him, change him, and reveal the true meaning of compatibility. John felt the bond with the alien Hound more strongly than ever. It was subtle at first, like a faint hum in his mind, barely noticeable, yet impossible to ignore. Every thought he had seemed to ripple outward, brushing against the consciousness of the Hound. He could feel it analyzing him, learning him, understanding him in ways no human ever could. The connection was both comforting and terrifying. He had never experienced anything like this, and the depth of it made his heart race. For days, John found it impossible to return to normal life. Sleep became irregular. Food tasted bland. Even the city streets felt alien to him. Everywhere he went, he sensed the presence of something larger, watching, guiding, and shaping his perception of the world. Ordinary problems, work, bills, small personal worries seemed meaningless now. The bond with the Hound had opened a new perspective, one that made everything else pale in comparison. The Hound did not speak aloud, but its presence was always clear. John began to notice subtle changes in himself. Thoughts he had never considered before now seemed natural. He could anticipate the Hound's actions and understand its intentions without a word. At times, he felt it guiding him, steering his choices, helping him see dangers and opportunities that his ordinary senses could not detect. Fear remained constant and sharp, but it was now accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. He could feel himself growing stronger mentally, his mind adapting to the unusual connection, yet with understanding came responsibility. The Hound revealed visions of other humans who had been deemed compatible in the past. Some had struggled to accept the bond, resisting the connection, and suffering as a result. Their fear had overwhelmed them, leaving them isolated, tormented, and unable to function within their own world. John shivered at the thought. He knew he could not afford to fail. The bond was not simply a choice. It was a responsibility he had to honor. Not only for himself, but for something far greater than he could yet comprehend. The alien Hound also showed him glimpses of other worlds. He saw landscapes that seemed impossible, floating mountains, vast oceans of shifting colors, forests illuminated by glowing plants. In these visions, he witnessed humans and hounds working together, overcoming challenges that would have broken ordinary minds. John realized that compatibility was not only about survival, it was about collaboration, understanding, and courage. The bond was designed to create harmony between species. Failure would have consequences beyond imagination. One night, John woke abruptly. He could feel the Hound nearby, its presence almost tangible, like a weight pressing gently against his chest. It did not move or make a sound, but he knew it was watching him. He sat up, heart pounding, and realized he could sense its emotions, its focus, its thoughts. The bond was no longer subtle, it was real, alive, demanding his attention. John felt fear mix with awe. He understood that his life as he had known it was over. Every choice, every thought, every feeling now mattered in a way that was terrifyingly clear. The Hound guided him to a quiet place outside the city, a small forest clearing bathed in moonlight. The air smelled fresh and earthy, and John could hear distant sounds of animals, although they seemed faint and unreal. Here, in this isolated space, he could feel the bond fully. Thoughts flowed between them like a silent conversation. He could sense the Hound's expectations, its concern, and even its subtle pride in his ability to withstand fear. At the same time, John could feel his own thoughts being shared, making him feel both exposed and strangely empowered. The Hound communicated without words, showing John the potential that lay within him. He saw that his mind could process information faster, notice details others overlooked, and understand situations with unusual clarity. Emotions became sharper, more vivid. He could sense danger in ways that went beyond instinct. And yet alongside this awakening came a deep exhaustion, as though the bond demanded more energy than he had ever used. It was challenging, uncomfortable, and sometimes frightening. But John understood that adaptation was necessary for survival. Days turned into weeks, though John lost all sense of time. The city felt increasingly distant, mundane, and irrelevant. The bond required focus and attention, training his mind to perceive patterns, anticipate movements, and remain calm under stress. The Hound pushed him gently but firmly, testing his ability to remain composed. At first, John struggled. Panic would rise uncontrollably, threatening to sever the fragile connection. But gradually, he learned to control it. The Hound's presence guided him, steadying him, and teaching him that fear could be transformed into focus. John began to notice subtle changes in his own behavior. He reacted faster, thought more clearly, and felt more aware of everything around him. Even ordinary interactions in the city seemed to shift. He could sense emotions in strangers, detect tension in voices, and notice details that had always escaped him. It was exhausting, yes, but also exhilarating. He realized that the bond was reshaping him, preparing him for challenges that he could not yet fully understand. And despite the fear, he began to feel a cautious confidence. Yet there were moments of doubt and loneliness. John missed the simplicity of his old life, the predictability, the comfort, the sense that he could rest without consequence. But those moments were brief. The bond with the Hound was constant, demanding and undeniable. He could not ignore it, nor did he truly want to. A part of him had always longed for something extraordinary, something that gave life meaning beyond routine. Now he had found it, though it came with a heavy cost. One evening, the Hound guided him to the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast valley. Moonlight glimmered off the surface of a winding river far below. John felt the full force of the bond here, more intense than ever. He could sense the Hound's thoughts, as if they were his own. And he realized that this connection was no longer a passive experience. It was active, alive, and mutual. He could feel the Hound's focus, its intention, and its silent guidance. And in that moment, he understood that survival and compatibility were intertwined. Fear returned, sharper than ever, as he realized what was at stake. Compatibility was not only about endurance, it was about responsibility. It's about maintaining balance between species and worlds. Failure was not an option. John thought about all the ordinary humans around him who lived unaware of the larger universe, and he felt both sorrow and a sense of duty. He had been chosen, and that choice carried consequences he could not ignore. The Hound, sensing his fear, offered reassurance in the simplest way, a gentle nudge with its head, a soft hum that resonated in his mind. John felt a strange comfort, a reminder that he was not alone. The bond was not meant to isolate him. It was meant to connect him, to guide him, and to help him grow. Slowly, he allowed himself to trust it, to accept that this partnership was real, necessary, and transformative as he stood on the cliff. Feeling the wind against his face and the Hound beside him, John realized something profound. Fear would always be present, but it no longer had to control him. He had a choice, to resist and suffer, or to embrace the bond and grow stronger. He understood that acceptance did not mean surrender, it meant understanding. Courage and the willingness to face the unknown. The ordinary life he had known was gone, but in its place was a path of possibility, challenge, and extraordinary meaning. The bond began to deepen further. John could feel the Hound's presence in ways he could not have imagined before, its thoughts flowing into his mind, its focus sharpening his own senses. He could anticipate the movements of animals, the shifts in the wind, even subtle changes in the environment around him. The experience was overwhelming, yet thrilling. He realized that the bond was not a burden alone. It was also a gift, offering abilities, insights, and understanding beyond what he had ever known. Exhausted yet exhilarated, John finally sat down beside the Hound. He placed his hand gently on its fur and felt a connection that went beyond words. Fear still lingered, but it was no longer paralyzing. He had begun to understand the balance between fear and courage, between doubt and trust, and in that moment felt a small spark of hope, a recognition that while the journey ahead would be difficult, he could endure it. He could survive. He could adapt. He could embrace the bond and perhaps one day fully understand its true meaning. John had spent weeks learning to live with the alien Hound, adapting to the bond that connected them in ways he had never imagined possible. He had felt fear, confusion, and loneliness, but he had also discovered strength, clarity, and a sense of purpose he never knew he possessed. Every day, the bond grew stronger, and he began to understand what compatibility truly meant, not simply survival, but transformation, connection, and responsibility. Now, as dawn approached one quiet morning, John stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the city he had once called home. The streets below were empty, the buildings familiar yet distant, and the air carried the faint smell of morning dew. He could feel the Hound beside him, calm and watchful, its presence both grounding and powerful. For the first time, John fully understood that the life he had known, the ordinary, predictable life, was over. Every choice, every comfort, every moment of safety he had once relied on had ended. He felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the life he would never return to, for the friends, the routines, the simple pleasures of ordinary existence. Relief because he had discovered something far greater, a purpose, a bond, and a path that went beyond the mundane. The Hound had chosen him, and though fear still lingered, John felt a flicker of courage. He understood that he had been given an opportunity, extraordinary, terrifying, and rare. The Hound moved closer, and John felt the connection between them deepen. Thoughts and emotions flowed freely, unspoken but understood. He could sense the Hound's confidence, its calmness, and the steady rhythm of its mind. At the same time, he could feel his own thoughts shaping the bond, contributing to its strength. The connection was no longer one-sided. It was mutual, a partnership that demanded trust, understanding, and courage. John remembered the visions the Hound had shown him: distant planets, humans working with alien beings, challenges that tested both mind and spirit. He understood now that he had been chosen not because of skill or power, but because of his ability to endure, adapt, and connect. Most humans would have failed, overcome by fear or doubt. But he had survived, and in doing so, he had proven that compatibility was more than a test, it was a bridge between worlds. The Hound communicated again, not with words, but with a flow of images and thoughts. John saw himself leaving the city, stepping into the unknown, guided by the Hound. He saw new worlds, strange landscapes, beings unlike anything on Earth. The bond allowed him to understand and anticipate challenges, to perceive dangers before they arrived, and to respond with clarity and focus. It was exhilarating, but it also carried immense responsibility. Every step he took would matter, not just for himself, but for the connection between species, for the balance the Hound's kind sought to maintain. Fear rose again, sharp and insistent. He thought of the life he was leaving behind, his apartment, his friends, the routines he had clung to. Could he truly leave it all behind? Could he accept that the ordinary life he had known was over forever? The Hound's presence reassured him, a quiet reminder that he would not face the unknown alone. The bond was not a prison, it was a partnership, offering guidance, protection, and understanding. Slowly, John allowed himself to trust it completely as the sun began to rise. Casting golden light across the city, John felt a profound sense of clarity. He realized that fear was natural, but it did not have to control him. He had been tested, challenged, and shaped by the bond. Now it was time to embrace the future fully, to step forward into a life that was no longer ordinary. A life filled with unknown possibilities, challenges, and wonders. The Hound moved to his side, its glowing eyes meeting his. John could feel its thoughts clearly, calm, encouraging, and patient. The bond pulsed between them, strong and steady. He understood that this was not just about leaving Earth. It was about stepping into a new reality, one that demanded courage, trust, and adaptability. And he was ready. He looked back at the city one last time. The familiar streets, the buildings, the everyday world he had known all seemed small and distant now. His ordinary life had ended, and a new chapter was beginning. He took a deep breath, feeling the wind against his face, the strength of the Hound beside him, and the steady rhythm of the bond connecting them. Every fear remained, but it had transformed into determination. John began walking forward, following the Hound through a narrow path that led away from the city. The ground beneath him felt solid, yet strange, as if the world itself had shifted. The Hound guided him carefully, teaching him to move with awareness, to sense subtle changes in the environment, to anticipate challenges before they appeared. John realized that the bond was not just mental or emotional, it was a training, preparation for everything that lay ahead. As they moved, John felt his senses expanding. He could notice details in the air, shifts in sound, the faintest traces of life around him. He understood the Hound's guidance without words, and he began to respond instinctively, trusting the connection and learning from it. The fear that had once paralyzed him was still present, but now it was tempered by skill, understanding, and awareness. He was learning, adapting, and becoming something more than he had ever imagined. They traveled for hours, or perhaps days' time felt different in the presence of the bond. John lost count of ordinary hours and minutes. Instead, he measured time by progress, learning, and connection. The Hound showed him hidden dangers, unseen paths, and subtle signs in the world around him. Each lesson strengthened the bond and prepared him for challenges he could not yet fully comprehend. And through it all, he began to feel confidence growing within him. Quiet, steady certainty that he could endure, survive, and even thrive. The landscape began to change. Trees and rocks gave way to strange terrain, unlike anything on Earth. Colors shimmered differently. Light seemed to bend in unusual ways, and the air carried unfamiliar scents. John realized that he was no longer in a place he could recognize. Yet he did not panic. The bond with the Hound provided guidance, protection, and understanding. He followed it willingly, trusting its presence and allowing it to lead him into the unknown. Finally, they reached the edge of a vast valley. A river of shimmering light flowed through it, and towering structures rose in the distance, unlike any human architecture. John felt awe and fear in equal measure. He knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would test every part of him, mind, body, and spirit. Yet he also felt a strange exhilaration, a recognition that he had been chosen for a reason, and that he was capable of facing what lay ahead. The Hound sat beside him, calm and steady, and John felt the bond pulse strongly between them. He understood fully now. Compatibility was not just survival. It was transformation, connection, and purpose. He had been chosen not because he was extraordinary in the ordinary sense, but because he possessed the ability to adapt, endure, and grow. Most humans would fail such a test, but he had succeeded. And now, the real journey was beginning. John took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the bond strengthen with every movement. Fear remained, but it was now balanced by courage and trust. He had left his ordinary life behind, and though sorrow lingered, he embraced the unknown with determination. The alien Hound walked beside him, guiding him into a reality far beyond his imagination. A reality where he would face challenges, learn, and grow in ways he could never have anticipated. As they moved together, John realized something profound. Life was no longer about ordinary routines or predictable outcomes. It was about connection, responsibility, and courage. The bond with the Hound had transformed him, opened his mind, and shown him the vast possibilities of existence. His life as he had known it was over, but in its place was a new life. Extraordinary, challenging, and full of meaning. And in that moment, John understood fully. Fear would always exist, but it did not have to control him. He had been chosen, he had survived, and he had embraced the bond. His ordinary life had ended, and he was stepping into a future where every choice mattered. Every thought shaped reality, and every step was a journey into the unknown. He was ready.